Good morning. Morning. My name is Tom Kirk, and on behalf of Superintendent Hoffmeister and the Oklahoma State Department of Education, I'd like to welcome you to an overview of the fiscal year 2020 consolidated monitoring process. Just very briefly, what we'll talk about today, because it's fairly involved. I want to just give a quick view of what is consolidated monitoring, then who gets monitored and why. There are two different types of monitoring. There's desk monitoring and site monitoring, so we'll go over a little bit what the difference is between those two. Then we'll look at for the entire process, how it will unfold over the course of the coming school year. So the process and timeline. Then I'd like to get into some of the documents that were sent out that I hope you have received. If you have not received them, they will be up on the federal program's website very shortly. I don't think they're up yet, but within a couple of days they should be there. So we'll look at the toolkit and the monitoring checklist, which were sent out, and then most importantly, the monitoring tool, which is a kind of big, kind of comprehensive document. And then I'd like to look a little bit about outcomes. You know, what are the possible outcomes by the end of the year? I have a few suggestions, and then we should have some question time at the end of that. I'll go ahead and say right now also, if we do run out of time, I will give you my email address and phone number at the end. Please let me know any questions, because I do plan also to record a frequently asked questions piece to put up on our website that will be available within the next couple of weeks. So, what is consolidated monitoring? Okay, we do this because the United States Department of Education requires that all local education agencies, subrecipients of federal funds, participate in a monitoring process to ensure accountability. Through this process, the Office of Federal Programs at the State Department of Education verifies that federal requirements are being met by the state's schools and LEAs. The monitoring process also provides an opportunity for OSDE to provide technical assistance and guidance to LEAs in order to strengthen their program administration and improve quality of their programs. So just going to sum up, it's not a punitive exercise. It's about making sure requirements are being met and helping districts to improve their programs. So who gets monitored? There's a 3-year cycle, and all LEAs that receive federal funds are monitored at least once during that 3-year cycle. This year is the second year of the current cycle. We started it last year. There was a brand new monitoring tool last year. You may have seen that from friends who got monitored last year. This year's tool is mostly the same. It's been tweaked a little bit, and some of the things are placed in a different order, but it's substantially the same as last year. So there's the 3-year cycle. In addition to the 3-year cycle, we do a risk assessment of all of the LEAs in the state, and they are scored on a range of factors indicating risk in the management of federal funds. LEAs that are identified as representing an elevated risk in the management of federal funds are then added to the current rotation. So about 90% of the districts being monitored are just regularly scheduled, and then there's about another 10% who have been added to that rotation. Okay, all the LEAs that are to be monitored this year received notification yesterday, July 30th, as to whether they will be desk monitored or site monitored. Desk monitored LEAs are required to submit the monitoring tool, which we'll look at in a few minutes, and supporting documentation on a flash drive postmarked no later than December 2nd, 2019. Okay, the flash drive all of the documentation is to be saved in a particular format. We'll look at that a little bit in a minute. There are some instructions at the beginning of the monitoring tool that I urge you to read carefully. And there's also our mailing address, in case you don't have it, is in the instruction section of the monitoring tool. So if you're being desk monitored, you gather the documentation, save it onto a flash drive, and send the flash drive to us by December 2nd. If you're being site monitored, all of that applies to you, and in addition, you will be visited for a site visit. So all LEAs being site monitored submit the same documentation as those being desk monitored. Site monitored LEAs will also be contacted individually in order to arrange a site visit by OSDE staff. I believe in the notification that went out yesterday, there's a date given for the site visit. We will call to verify that date and to set up interviews with local personnel. At the site visit, the LEA will be notified informally of potential compliance issues during exit conference, which wraps up the site visit. Formal notification of compliance or non-compliance, though, will come only at the end of the entire process, when we've reviewed the monitoring tool. So, final compliance or non-compliance will be communicated not just after the site visit, but taking into account also the desk monitoring material that will be submitted with the monitoring tool. Okay, the entire process and timeline. Okay, as I mentioned before, everyone's required to save the monitoring tool and supporting documentation on the flash drive, send it to the Office of Federal Programs no later than December 2nd. The reviewer assigned to your district will then evaluate that documentation and add explanatory comments on the monitoring tool. So most of what gets written on the monitoring tool will be written by the reviewer here at the Office of Federal Programs. When a first review is completed, the reviewer will return the monitoring tool to the LEA along with any requests for further or alternative documentation. Okay. An ideal case would be that you get everything in and everything's right the first time. That would be great, in which case you get the monitoring tool and a compliance letter and everybody's happy. To be honest, that doesn't happen very often. Chances are the monitoring tool comes back with some request for documentation. So then at that point, you look at the comments, you gather up the requested documentation, and at this point, there should be, since you put a lot of effort into it the first time, there will be a lot less material to submit, so you are allowed on the second round to submit documentation by email directly to the reviewer. Depending on the quality of the documentation, there could be several such exchanges between the reviewer and the LEA. Again, ideally, you get it right the first time. If that doesn't happen, second most ideal outcome, you get it right the second time. But it's possible that it may take several exchanges to get everything in, all of the what we're looking for. Anyhow, after this give and take, there is a deadline, and that is the entire process closes on April 13th of 2020. So by April 13th, the Office of Federal Programs must have received satisfactory documentation for all of the relevant points on the monitoring tool. In that case, the LEA is considered compliant. If not, then the LEA is considered non-compliant. When we get to outcomes, after we've looked at the various documents, we'll go over a little bit what consequences are of non-compliance. Okay, so now I'd like to look at some of the documents that went out with the notification yesterday. And here I took some screenshots. You've got the whole documents here that you can look at. in due course. But here on the left, I have the title page and the table of contents from the Federal Programs Consolidated Monitoring Resource Toolkit. I very, very strongly recommend you have a look at this. There are templates and examples of a number of documents that you're required to have on hand. That not all districts always have these things on hand, so as you go through the monitoring tool, if you come across something that you realize you don't have in your records, check first in the toolkit. There may be a template there that you can use. Okay, that being said, these are templates. Please don't just copy and paste. You adapt it to your district as needed. Then on the right here, we have the monitoring supporting document checklist. You have one of these, your reviewer will have one of these, and it's a handy way to keep track of what documents you've gathered and what you haven't. The items on the checklist, there's a very brief description in the right-hand column. In the middle column is the indicator as it is listed on the monitoring tool. These are numbered. These indicators will also be the title of the file on the flash drive, so this, everything should line up. I've also, just kind of because of a personal quirk, I've also color coordinated these so that each section on the checklist corresponds to the shading on the monitoring tool. That's just, I visualize things that way, and I hope there are some other people out there that find that useful. Okay, so now I'd like to look a little bit more at length at the monitoring tool itself. The first several pages of the monitoring tool have instructions of how to fill it out. They're pretty exhaustive. They're also kind of boring, but I encourage you to plow through them anyhow. And then you come to a page where there is a monitoring, or the LEI information table, and then another table at the bottom of the page. Here we need contact information, your name, county code, and so on. Contact information for the superintendent, your federal programs officer, and school board president. And then there's a red box there where the superintendent certifies that all of the material submitted is true and accurate. Okay, that box needs to be checked. So this is your first task. You complete that table, check the box. The table at the lower part of this page is for your reviewer. You don't need to check any boxes here. The reviewer will check what title programs you receive allocations for, which helps us then know what to look for. One thing that you may want to look at, though, in this box is each title program has a colored dot next to it, and those colored dots appear as we go through the monitoring tool. So you have to submit documentation for those title programs that you receive funding for. And this is, I hope, a quick way to single out the sections of the monitoring tool that you have to complete and the ones that you don't have to complete. There on the very bottom row, the third one over, there is a black circle. If you find that next to an item on the monitoring tool, it means that everyone has to do, has to provide documentation for that point. So let's move on a little bit and see just what the tool looks like. Again, I'm going to say if you have seen the tool from last year from other districts, the content is the same. We've changed the order a little bit. I've tried to put the items that apply to everyone at the beginning of each section. I think it just seemed to flow more easily that way. So if you look here at the first page, this is the first section, the transparent accountability section. We have two indicators, CFR 1 and CFR 2. All of the items in this cross-cutting fiscal requirements have the light green shading there. Each of these items, they're in the second column, have a black circle, meaning everyone has to submit something for these two items. Then, in the first column with the text, there are definitions. There are also citations from the law and regulations saying basically why you need to keep these, you need to have these documents, why we need to check. The second column of text gives a description of what we're looking for. And then the last part, which says met requirements, yes, no, NA, and comments, that's for your reviewer. So you can ignore those. I chose this page here to start off with. There's the CFR 1 is divided into two parts. So you'll submit two documents for this. And over here in the first column where it says CFR 1, it says files, okay, 1 CFR 1A, and 2, I just lost my mouse, 2 CFR 1B. When you copy these documents onto your flash drive, the first part here, your written inventory procedures, should be labeled 1 CFR 1A. That should be the title of the file. Then an inventory list from previous and current fiscal year, that should be saved as 2 CFR 1B. So for each item here, you have the names of the files that need to be uploaded. They should be labeled that way. And under CFR 1, it's two parts, so there are two files to be uploaded. The first one is a procedures, and then the second one is the inventory itself. So I'm going to stop here for a second also to point out another thing here that people struggled with last year. A number of items request procedures, and some items request policies. And there's a lot of confusion about what the difference is. Okay, I'll start with policies first. A policy is your district policy. It must be board approved. So if you submit a policy, it will have board approval date. It will probably be on district letterhead. If not, it should at the very least have the district name on it. A number of districts, especially smaller districts, have a packet of policies that were prepared by OSSBA, which have been adapted to their districts. That's fine. Make sure it's adapted to your district, though, and not just a blanket thing. So they have very good policies, but every district is different. Procedures, on the other hand, do not need to be board approved. They are a description of how you go about doing these things. In a lot of smaller districts, the procedures are often communicated orally. There's just somebody in the office that's always done this thing, and that's their responsibility. We're asking you to write that down. So we want a step-by-step procedure, with the job title of the person that does various aspects of the procedure and, how that's carried out. Okay, sometimes these will be fairly simple. Other times, like the inventory procedures, there are several steps that need to be addressed. Before I move on, one more thing that I want to throw in here that is new for this year. Not every item on the monitoring tool will apply to all districts. So as you go through the tool, please keep a list of those items that do not apply to your district. And then when you submit all of your documentation on the flash drive, please include a list on school letterhead, signed by the superintendent, of all the items that don't apply to your district, along with a brief explanation of why. Okay, and this can be very simple, so even something like, we don't have any English language learners, or in the case of inventory, just we haven't used federal funds to purchase anything. But just, a list of the things that don't apply to you, so we know not to dig around looking for these things, or to request them because we think they're missing. So that should be just included on a PDF with all of the other documentation. Okay, here, just continuing through the first section, I just wanted to point out here, there is here item CFR 4, cash management, written procedures. This is an item that a number of districts struggled with last year, and my suggestion here is, don't overthink it. Whether you have written procedures or not, I'm sure all districts have procedures because you all deal with cash management. In a small district, it might be very informal and spoken. So here, we just want to encourage you to write them down. Here, the monitoring process is a good thing to spur you to write all this stuff down. Okay, this slide and the next one give examples of two things. The first one is a policy document here. CFR 8 is asking for your written compensation policy. And we have a number of items here that should be included in your compensation policy. Okay, this is a policy, so this will have to be board approved. So when you submit the policy, we'd like to see, the date of board approval and indication that it's specific to your district. The other thing on this slide that I wanted to mention is this first one, PPR1 for policies, procedures, and requirements. Number 1 are written procedures for time distribution records, and then we will also ask for sample time distribution records. So there are going to be two things. The first are the procedures, and we have the elements that should include written here, and then part B over here are sample time distribution records. Okay, there are two items here on the monitoring tool where you need some input from your reviewer. We will be in touch with you to provide a list of randomly selected employees of your district who are paid with federal funds, and we would like to see sample time distribution records for those people. Okay, so please don't just send in some sample records that you've chosen. We get to choose who we want to see sample records from, and those should be labeled. Let me go back up. Excuse me. They should be labeled here, PPR 1 or 12, PPR 1B, and then the name of the person whose TDR you're sending in. Okay, that's in the instructions, but I just wanted to point that out. I'm going to skip a little bit here. We're into the pink section here. And I wanted to point out two items here as examples of things that weren't necessarily all that clear to people last year. The first one here, the PNAC 8, the first thing it's asking for is evidence of dissemination of homeless liaisons' duties and requirements. There are several points on the tool that will ask for evidence of dissemination of something. So usually this will be a poster or a screenshot of your district website. Either of those are fine. We want evidence that you're actually making public this information. If it's a poster, we'd like a photograph of that poster in place, not just a poster grabbed from a Google search and images. I mean, you can find posters that way, but we want to see that you've actually posted it in the school or in a place where students are likely to see it. So a photograph of the poster in place would be great. If you have the information on your website, then a screenshot of your website showing that information, that you've made it publicly available. On part B of this same indicator here, it says evidence of homeless education training for staff, and it says agendas and sign-in sheets. There are several points on the monitoring tool where we will ask for agendas and sign-in sheets, and that means both. Doesn't mean one or the other. It means both. Sign-in sheets also, I probably shouldn't say this because I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but it looks very suspicious if you hand in the same sign-in sheet for several items. So, please don't do that. We're authentic sign-in sheets. The other thing on this page that I wanted to look at is Panacea 9. This is evidence of homeless liaison participation in trainings. Beginning this year, homeless liaisons will be required to complete training. It's an online training called Kickstand that is currently not up and running, but it is in the works and should be live soon. I'm getting some feedback from the room here. Soon. We don't have an exact date, but it should be live soon. A notification, when that goes live, a notification will be sent out. So for this item here, the training that we're requiring now is the Kickstand training. It's an online training. You get a certificate at the end for proof that you've done the training. Send us a copy of the certificate. Okay, on this page, I wanted to point out two things. One is an example of, instead of the black circle, here we have a blue circle, and above it, it says T, Roman numeral 3A. So this means if you receive funds for Title 3A, you have to provide documentation for this point. If you do not receive funds for Title 3A, you can skip this. And so there will be several places on the tool where you'll see a colored dot there and the name of a title. That's what that's for. If you don't receive funds for that title, you don't have to submit documentation there. The other thing on this slide that I wanted to look at is this item down here, CQ1, for certification and qualifications. This is credentials for paraprofessionals. Again here, like with the sample TDRs, your reviewer will send you a list of randomly selected paras working at in your district, I believe working at Title I sites. And we would like to see the credentials of those paras. So we will send you a list, and then you send credentials for those people. By credentials, we don't mean just a list of what credentials we have, but we would like a copy, a photocopy or a photograph of the actual certificate or a college transcript for each of those people. Okay, then finally, at the very end of the tool, this is on, I think, page 35 or thereabouts, not to scare anybody. There are two tables. This first one is at each round of review, your reviewer will sign it and date it. Okay, then if it takes, in this case, up to 4 rounds of sending it back and forth to get all the documentation, we'll keep track of the dates there, when you get it back. And then the final results at the bottom here, ideally compliant, less ideally non-compliant, and then your reviewer's signature and the reviewer's supervisor's signature and dates. Okay, so several months from now, how does it all conclude? So the desired outcome is compliance. So Office of Federal Programs received and approved all relevant documentation by April 13th, 2020. A compliance letter will be sent to the LEA together with a copy of the final monitoring tool checklist and the final version of the monitoring tool. That's the outcome we hope everyone reaches. The alternative is non-compliance, and that would be if we don't receive all relevant documentation by April 13th. Well, I should also add, if we don't receive any documentation by December 2nd, that also leads to non-compliance. But everyone's going to send us stuff, I'm sure. But if by April 13th we have not received all relevant documentation, then the district will be found to be non-compliant and will receive a non-compliance letter. The consequences of this are that if you're found to be non-compliant, reimbursement of all federal funds will be withheld for the remainder of the fiscal year. Non-compliant LEAs will, however, have 30 calendar days to submit a corrective action plan for each missing or unacceptable item. Once the corrective action plans have been received and approved by OSDE, then that LEA's federal funds for the remainder of the current fiscal year will be released. A failure to submit corrective action plans within the 30 days could result in the withholding of federal funds both for the current and the following fiscal year at OSDE discretion. Okay. A hold, I'd like to add here, a hold on your federal funds also means that you'll lose any funds that cannot be carried over within the parameters of each title program. So, some suggestions. These are just gratuitous suggestions from us. I suggest designate a manager. If possible, assign one person with thorough knowledge of the district operations and strong organizational skills to manage the monitoring process. We very strongly suggest that you start early. There is a lot of documentation to gather together. It takes time. It takes time to organize it all. So please identify and assign district staff to be responsible for specific requirements and meet on a consistent schedule to better ensure accountability. Be specific, especially when creating or reviewing procedures. Identify specific steps in your local processes and the specific positions, job positions, responsible for implementation. Be thorough. Since the monitoring tool is no longer divided by title programs, make sure that every section is reviewed to ensure that you have submitted all required documentation. And a very, very strong suggestion here at the bottom one, ask questions. Use your reviewer as a resource. If you're unsure what an indicator is asking, it's much better to ask first and then submit the correct documentation than to have to return to it and correct it later, sometimes over and over again. And just anecdotally, last year I had one district that called me nearly every day through the month of October and most of November, and I was honestly getting kind of irritated. But then when they submitted their documentation, it was perfect. And at that point, I loved them, and I still do. So those are our suggestions. You're also strongly encouraged to attend one of the 4 training sessions to be held August 29 and 30 at Francis Tuttle Rockwell campus in Oklahoma City. Links to sign up for those sessions were included in the notification emails that were sent out yesterday. If you're having trouble with that, please let us know. And with that, I'm going to open this up for questions. And I already see one question here. It says, we were monitored last year and this year. Will we also be monitored next year? I sincerely hope not. That can happen. There's a risk assessment. The criteria for the risk assessment were sent out with the notification emails yesterday. In that, we assign points for various factors to all of the districts, and then if you score above a certain threshold, this year I believe it was 12 points or higher, then you get monitored. One of the main reasons, and I don't know what district this is that's asking this, but there are several districts that were non-compliant in monitoring last year, and that means quite a few points, and so they have to do it again this year. Another reason that you might be monitored 2 years in a row is if you have a particularly big allocation. That's just we see as inherently a risk factor, or if you have second-year carryover or problems with an audit from another department or another office here in the department. Those are all things that could score you points and lead to you being monitored 2 years in a row. So here's another question. How will the training sessions in August differ from today's presentation? They will be much more thorough. In August, we will have, I believe, a 4-hour time slot, and that will give us time to go over the entire monitoring tool, whereas I've just shown some samples of it. The monitoring tool itself is over 30 pages long, and there are, I think, 135 indicators on it. And we'll have more time at the training sessions. Will SDE provide specific reasons for multi-year monitoring to the district superintendent for previous questions? I can do that if you...
You'll get their name.
Yeah, will that be... I'll get that. Yeah, okay, yes. Gary's telling me I will get a name to put to this question. So, yes, I can send specific reasons. And we'll try to do that this afternoon or at the latest tomorrow. And can we see the actual risk assessment with scores? Yes, I can tell you what categories scores were awarded for, and the score that was awarded. I think I'll go ahead and ask anyone in the room with me here if they have any questions. What was that? We will post the webinar later. That usually takes 2 or 3 days.
I'll have it to you today.
Okay. I think it usually takes 2 or 3 days.
It takes 2 or 3 days.
Yes. But yes, the webinar will be posted very soon. Was it just overwhelmingly thorough, and so there's no... Wow. Okay.
You might show them the last slide.
Okay. Yeah, there is one more slide.
So they can
here.
get to you every day.
Yeah, just opening it up completely here. So if you have any further questions about the monitoring process or about any individual items on the monitoring tool, please don't hesitate to contact me or your assigned reviewer. Sorry about that. Within the next 2 weeks, I am planning to put together a frequently asked questions document, probably a recorded kind of conversation thing, based on the questions that come in over the next 10 days or so, also based on a lot of questions that came in last year. So, and that too will be uploaded to Federal Programs website, which you can find at www.sde.ok.gov/federal-programs. And here at the bottom we have my name, I'm Tom Kirk, and my phone number, that's a direct line, and my email if you would like to get in touch with me. Okay.